welcome to the deep dive. Okay, so let's forget the usual financial spreadsheets and formulas for a bit. Today, we're digging into something, well, arguably much more powerful. Our own psychology when it comes to money.
Yeah, absolutely. We're drawing heavily from Morgan Housel's work, The Psychology of Money.
Right. And the idea isn't just typical finance tips. It's more like a shortcut to understanding why we make the choices we do.
Yeah.
You know, everything from buying coffee to big investment calls.
Exactly. And as Housel points out, we're constantly making these financial decisions, right? Big ones, small ones.
All the time.
But they're not just about logic, not purely anyway. They're like tangled up with our personal history, our biases, how we see the world.
Yeah.
So our mission today is basically to unpack some of those key psychological forces, give you a better handle on your own financial behavior.
All right, let's jump in. First up, this idea of time and compounding. Now, the standard advice is always, just stay invested for a long time. Compounding needs years,
Yeah.
right? That's the magic ingredient.
That's definitely the common wisdom, and time is crucial, no doubt about it. But a really key insight from the source material is that the quality of that time, that matters just as much, maybe even more.
Quality of time, meeting.
Well, spending decades in investments that are just, duds, it's not going to build wealth magically. The actual choices you make about where you invest, that has a massive impact on your returns.
Okay, that makes sense. It's not just passive waiting. And the sources also mentioned how sometimes maybe we even choose to interrupt that smooth timeline. Things like tactical asset allocation or stop losses.
Precisely. Yeah. For some people, managing risk actively like that is a very deliberate choice.
Yeah.
They might be okay sacrificing some potential pure compounding gain
Right.
in exchange for trying to protect their capital, maybe avoid the worst downturns. It's a trade-off.
But focusing only on that super long-term compounding picture, that has downsides too, according to the material.
It does. There are limitations. For one thing, inflation, it's that silent value eater, right? Simple compounding math often doesn't really show you how much your real buying power is shrinking over time.
Good point.
And another thing, if you're just focused way, way out on the horizon, it can lead to complacency.
How so?
You might just assume time will fix everything. So maybe you don't stay as informed, don't reevaluate things as often as you should. And then there are those big systemic risks, black swan events, financial crises. Long timelines don't always guarantee recovery from those massive shocks.
Oh, interesting nuance there.
Yeah.
Let's pivot a bit. There's a really powerful argument in Housel's work about the savings rate. The idea that how much you save out of your income is actually more important than your income level itself or even your investment returns.
Yeah, this is like a cornerstone insight. We tend to fixate on earning more or chasing higher returns, and those are great, obviously.
Sure.
But they're often affected by things way outside our control. Market volatility, economic shifts, stuff happens.
Right.
But your savings rate, how much you decide to put away each month, that's pretty much entirely up to you. It's a direct result of your choices, your discipline.
And there's that great line, savings, the space between ego and income. Can you unpack that a little?
Oh, yeah, it's brilliant, isn't it? It just nails it. The idea is that your ability to save often comes down to the gap between what you earn and what your ego convinces you that you need to spend to maintain a certain image or lifestyle.
Okay.
So the less you let that ego-driven spending creep up, the bigger the gap, the more you save. It's about consciously choosing long-term security over, that immediate gratification hit.
So practically, how do we actually widen that gap? The source offered some solid tips for boosting savings.
Yeah, practical stuff is key. That needs versus wants checklist is simple but super effective.
Wow.
Especially adding that cooling off period for the wants.
Right, wait a day or two.
Exactly. It just gives you that pause to think, do I really need this or is it just an impulse? And visual aids work too, like that savings thermometer chart idea. Seeing the progress visually can be really motivating, keeps you focused.
Now, saving isn't just about piling up cash for the sake of it, is it? The source has talked about these hidden benefits, less obvious advantages.
Totally. Yeah, beyond just having money to spend later, savings gives you something incredibly valuable, adaptability, optionality.
Optionality, like choices.
Exactly. Having that cushion means you can handle surprises, better job loss, health issues, whatever life throws at you. Or maybe it lets you take a chance on a new career path or even just take some time off. It buys you control over your time, your future.
And the source called this the unseen return. I like that phrase. What's behind it?
It's a really profound concept. It basically says the real value of savings isn't just the dollar amount. It's the freedom, the flexibility, the choices that money gives you, that peace of mind, the ability to change course. That's the unseen return. It's
Good.
huge. And those practical tips really drive it home. The skill investment fund, for instance, saving specifically to learn something new, like graphic design, directly links saving to future opportunity.
Right, investing in yourself.
Or the surprise expense jar, just a simple way to build that emergency buffer. And the time fund, saving explicitly so you can have more time flexibility later, that really highlights the unseen return idea.
It makes it tangible, connecting the saving action to a future possibility, not just an abstract bank balance.
Exactly. And things like the happiness hour, dedicating saved time to something you enjoy, or doing a regular subscription audit. Those help you make sure your spending and saving actually align with what brings you real value, real flexibility.
Okay, let's shift gears again. The financial world isn't static, right? It's always changing. The source is really stressed being careful about just applying old formulas. Adapting is key.
Oh, absolutely critical. You can't just assume that what worked 50 or even 20 years ago is the guaranteed playbook for today. The source gives great examples of stuff that's relatively new in the grand scheme of things.
Like what?
Well, widespread things like 401ks or similar retirement plans, the whole venture capital ecosystem, even just the makeup of the stock market itself, the dominant companies, the sectors, it's changed dramatically. These are fundamental shifts.
So just blindly using old rules of thumb, that could be risky or just not optimal anymore.
Yeah, potentially misleading even. Like the material points out, historical data is useful for context, absolutely, but it's not a crystal ball. There's that comparison between Benjamin Graham, the value investing legend who actually adapted his methods over his career,
Right.
and someone like Igor Panarin, who apparently stuck too rigidly to extrapolating past trends, which didn't end well. It shows the danger of being inflexible.
But the sources did offer some counterpoints, right?
Yeah.
We shouldn't just throw out all historical data.
No, definitely not. It's about balance. Historical data is the bedrock for a lot of useful economic models, and sometimes markets do overreact to change, creating instability. Plus, let's be real, trying to constantly learn and adapt to every tiny shift, that can be exhausting, maybe impractical for most people.
Okay.
And some core principles, like diversification, they've proven pretty resilient across different eras.
So it's less about discarding history, more about viewing it critically, understanding that change is constant, as the source puts it.
Exactly that. It's about recognizing the big structural shifts, how people save now, the impact of technology, maybe even how often recessions happen and what they look like, and thinking about how those changes might affect the old rules. Adaptability is the name of the game.
So how do we actually practice being more adaptable with our finances? Any practical steps?
Yeah, the change simulation exercise is interesting. Like actively game out scenarios. What if interest rates jump? What if the market drops 20%? How would my plan hold up?
Okay, stress testing it.
Exactly. Also, deliberately seeking out diverse financial perspectives. Read newsletters or follow experts from different schools of thought. Maybe someone focused on crypto, someone on commodities, someone on traditional value. Challenge your own bubble.
Good idea.
Trying out new tools, even on a small scale, like micro-investing apps, helps you get comfortable with financial tech.
And that rule audit idea you mentioned earlier is great.
Yeah, I like that one. Questioning the habits you just do automatically.
Right. Why do I do this? Is it still serving me? And talking to peers, maybe in a discussion group, can expose you to new strategies you hadn't considered. It's all about fostering that mindset of, okay, what's changing and how do I adjust?
Okay, let's bring it back to us, the humans involved. Our own behavior, our mindset, huge factors. The sources warned about chasing quick riches.
Oh yeah, the siren song of getting rich quick, it's always there. But the material really hammers home that patience, discipline, a long-term view, that's the much more reliable path. Think about Warren Buffett. Most of his wealth came much later in life. It's the compounding over decades. Right, the slow burn.
Contrast that with someone like Jesse Livermore, the famous speculator. Huge wins, but also huge losses, ultimately ruined because of impulsivity and trying to make a killing overnight.
The classic tortoise and the hare. And related to that, the sources cautioned about getting seduced by potentially massive gains without fully appreciating the risks involved.
Absolutely. You rarely get high returns without high risk. It's almost a law of finance. So cultivating what you might call a survivor's mindset is key. Focus less on hitting home runs and more on just staying in the game, enduring the inevitable downturns.
So seeing market drops not as a penalty, but as, like, the price of admission for
Yeah.
potential future gains.
Exactly. That's a great way to frame it. They're part of the deal. The source used the example of GE under Jack Welch. That relentless pressure for smooth, predictable growth eventually led them to take on hidden risks that came back to bite them hard. You can't just wish whisk away.
So, how do we actually train ourselves to have better financial behaviors, to be more patient, more risk-aware?
Well, one idea is starting small. Take tiny, controlled risks outside your finances just to build your comfort level with uncertainty. Maybe try a new hobby that pushes you a bit.
Interesting.
Simulated trading or investment games can also be useful. You learn about risk and reward without putting real money on the line. Keeping a market mood journal is another one, tracking how you feel when the market swings wildly. It helps you recognize your emotional triggers.
Know thyself.
Pretty much. And implementing something like a 24-hour rule before jumping into a potentially high return, maybe speculative investment just gives you time to cool off and think rationally.
I also thought the idea of having regular opportunity meetings with another investor was smart, getting that outside perspective.
Yeah, bouncing ideas off someone, having them challenge your assumptions, that's incredibly valuable. And simple things like automating your investments, dollar cost averaging, takes the emotion out of trying to time the market perfectly.
Right. Set it and forget it to some extent.
Exactly. Doing a pre-mortem on a financial decision like imagine it failed, now work backward to figure out why it can reveal risks you hadn't considered, and just being diligent about reading the fine print, scrutinizing reports. It's basic but crucial.
Now, even if we do everything right, or try to, setbacks happen. Losses are part of investing. How do we deal with that reality?
The main thing is accepting it up front. It's not if you'll have setbacks, it's when. So building in what the source calls a margin of safety is vital, a cushion, room for error.
Well.
The analogy used was blackjack card counters. They know they have an edge, but they also know they'll lose plenty of individual hands. They expect it. It's part of the process.
So don't get derailed by a single loss. Keep the long game in mind.
Exactly. Stay flexible, keep focused on your long-term goals. That's what helps you ride out the bumps without panicking.
But again, the sources presented some counter-arguments here too, right? It's not just about passively accepting losses.
Right, it's nuanced. Some economic theories, like the efficient market hypothesis, might suggest it's really hard to consistently avoid losses because prices reflect all information quickly.
Okay.
Others might argue that being too focused on safety, holding too much cash, means you miss out on growth, especially in competitive markets. And there's a risk that focusing too much on potential failure could make you overly timid, afraid to take reasonable risks needed for growth.
So it's that balancing act again. Be prepared for setbacks, but don't let that preparation paralyze you.
Precisely. You need realism and resilience, but you also need to stay proactive, keep learning, keep making informed decisions. Due diligence still matters immensely, even with margin of safety.
Now, one of the most mind-bending parts for me was about how much we change over time. Our priorities, our goals, they're not fixed. And that really messes with long-term financial planning.
Oh, this is such a big one and so easy to overlook. We tend to think our current selves, our current desires, are how we'll always be. But life happens. We learn, we grow, our circumstances change. What you desperately want at 25 might seem irrelevant at 45.
Yeah.
The anecdote about the doctor who spent years training only to realize later they didn't actually enjoy the work, that really hits home. Our careers, relationships, what we value, it can all shift. And our financial plans need some wiggle room for that.
The sources called it the future self fallacy. This idea that we're bad at predicting what future us will actually want.
Exactly. And there's this related concept, the end of history illusion, this feeling that we've basically finished developing, that our personality and tastes are now set.
Huh, yeah, right.
But just look around. People get tattoos removed, people get divorced, people make huge career changes late in life. It proves we do change, often profoundly. Learning new things, psychological shifts, health changes, even just broad economic trends can reshape our priorities.
So, making a super rigid 50-year financial plan based only on who you are today, that might be setting yourself up for problems.
It's definitely a risk. The suggestion is to aim for more balance and flexibility. Avoid locking yourself into extreme plans, either extremely frugal or extremely spendy, based purely on today's assumptions. And crucially, revisit your plan regularly. Check in. Does this still align with who I am now and where I think I'm heading?
But are there counter-arguments to being too flexible, like maybe sometimes sticking to a firm plan aggressive or conservative, is the right call.
Sure, absolutely. In certain economic climates, a really aggressive or a really cautious stance might pay off significantly. Planning for a worst-case scenario like very low earnings can be smart risk management for some.
Okay.
And the idea of balance is subjective anyway, right? Plus, constantly tweaking your plan could lead to decision fatigue. And maybe focusing too much on long-term flexibility makes you miss good short-term opportunities. It's complex.
Okay, let's talk about the Joneses. That whole social comparison thing. How much does looking at what others have affect our own spending and saving?
Oh, massively. It's human nature, baked right in. We constantly benchmark ourselves against others, especially when it comes to visible stuff, houses, cars, vacations.
Yeah.
But as the source points out, this keeping up with the Joneses game, it's a recipe for disaster. It can lead to unsustainable spending, feeling like you never have enough, constant dissatisfaction because the goalposts are always moving based on what someone else is doing.
It's like running on a hedonic treadmill, fueled by comparison.
Yeah.
So the advice is to define our financial goals independently.
Exactly. That's the escape hatch. You have to consciously base your financial aims on your own needs, your own values, what actually makes you happy and fulfilled, not on trying to match someone else's curated Instagram feed.
Easier said than done sometimes.
Definitely. But trying to measure your success against other people's constantly changing lifestyles is just futile. Maybe use others' success as inspiration, sure, but not as a direct benchmark for your own life.
So how do we cultivate that independent mindset, especially when we're bombarded with images of other people's apparent success?
Well, things like keeping a gratitude journal, but focusing specifically on non-material wealth relationships, skills, health, experiences, can help shift your perspective.
Okay, focusing on what you have, not what others seem to have.
Precisely. Or doing something like a skill swap with friends, trading knowledge or help instead of just buying things builds connection over consumption. Even some budgeting apps now have anonymized peer comparison features, which can give you context and motivation without triggering that direct, often harmful social rivalry.
Interesting. Okay, last big point. The distinction between being rich and being wealthy. What's the core idea here?
This is a really crucial mindset shift. The source basically defines rich as having a high current income, which often translates into visible spending. Fancy cars, big houses, you can see it. But wealthy, according to Housel, is different. It's the money you haven't spent. It's the accumulated resources, the assets. Wealth is what provides the optionality, the flexibility we talked about earlier. It's the difference between what you could spend and what you actually do spend.
So wealth is more about what's unseen, the financial security, the options, rather than the visible displays.
Exactly. It's prioritizing building up those unspent resources through saving and investing rather than prioritizing conspicuous consumption. True wealth buys freedom, not just stuff. It lets you design your life based on your values, not external pressures.
But, like the other points, there are probably nuances here too. Being rich can sometimes allow access to things that look like wealth.
For sure, the line can be blurry. Access to, say, top-tier education or healthcare often requires significant money, and that looks like wealth. Inherited money means someone might look rich without having earned it themselves. And generating passive income is a form of wealth, even if you use some of it for lifestyle. Plus, just having options doesn't automatically mean happiness. You could be wealthy and miserable. And being too frugal, hoarding wealth, might mean missing out on life experiences.
Right. And the definition might matter more or less depending on the economy or social factors.
Absolutely. In unstable economies, visible assets might feel less secure. Spending in your community can have positive effects. There can even be tension between purely individual wealth building and social responsibility.
So it's a concept to think about critically, apply it to your own situation.
Precisely. But the core principle is powerful. Real financial strength often lies in what you keep and the choices it gives you, not just what you show off.
Wow, okay. So wrapping this up, we've really journeyed through the psychology behind our money decisions today. We looked at time and compounding, not just the years, but the quality, the huge importance of the savings rate and that hidden benefit of flexibility it brings.
Right, and the need to adapt because the financial world is always changing. The value of patience and discipline over trying to get rich quick.
Yeah, and accepting that setbacks are inevitable, planning for them, thinking about how we change, how our priorities evolve, and how that impacts long-term plans.
And finally, ditching the keeping up with the Joneses trap by defining success on our own terms, understanding that true wealth is really about having options.
Exactly. Our hope for you listening is that this gives you some fresh perspectives on your own relationship with money, maybe illuminate some of those psychological forces pulling the strings behind the scenes.
But yeah, just some food for thought.
So here's a final thought to mull over. Building on that idea of our changing selves, knowing that your own priorities and values might look quite different 10 years from now, what's one concrete step, just one thing you can do today to build a little more flexibility, a bit more optionality into your financial life?
Something to chew on. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.